to another episode of the Groundswell Marketing Podcast, where I connect you to outstanding humans with sustainable ideas. I'm your host, Scott Martin, and today I'm introducing you to Roland Fraiser. He's a business mentor and CEO of Leverage, which is a company that helps businesses grow, scale, and exit. And he's also part of a world-renowned mastermind called the War Room Mastermind. And he's also, where I got to know him initially, was he's the principal of digitalmarketer.com, the Traffic and Conversion Summit, and TrueConversion.com. He's a guy that has some serious background beyond just being a strategic marketer, business owner. He's also been co-founder and principal of 5 different companies that Inc. Magazine has labeled as the fastest growing companies in e-commerce, e-learning, SaaS, and real estate. In addition, he's a serial entrepreneur who's built or sold over 24 businesses with adjusted sales ranging from, get this, $3 million to $4 billion. He consults to some of the top brands in the world, and I first met him as he was speaking at Business Mastery in Amsterdam with Tony Robbins, and was absolutely blown away by his strategies and breakdown of not growth marketing alone, but he was actually doing a deeper dive into how to really look and identify and be resourceful of different ways that you can grow your business from so many different angles. And we touch on that a bit on this episode. So this one's going to be a really insane episode. I'm so grateful for Roland. And without any more ado, let's just paddle in. Welcome to another episode of Groundswell. And today we have the one, the only Roland Fraiser. Welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So I'm so pumped about this episode. This has only taken us 4 months to line up, and I really appreciate us getting this lined up. You and I met in Amsterdam at Tony Robbins' event.
Yes, Business Mastery 2.
Business Mastery 2. And I got to tell you, I'm part of a platinum partnership at Business Mastery 2, and a lot of the plats, communicate at the event. And your presentation just blew everyone's minds. And that's actually what prompted me aggressively trying to track you down, as you recall, to get you on the show. So thank you so much for allowing me to badger you to get on the show.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I'm happy to have the opportunity to chat.
So let's just jump into it. One of the things that I think is really interesting, and before we jump into the growth marketing and all that kind of stuff, is if you follow, you have this thing you do every Friday. It's like one of those things that's really surprising. It's every Friday you post something about music, wine, something you're reading, and something else. Sorry, I didn't have off the top of my head.
Yeah, exactly.
So what is that? What's that about?
It's just a way to share the things that I have found that are interesting, that I think might be interesting to other folks. And also it starts lots of discussions around those different things. So it's just a cool way to engage with my friends and people that follow me and get smarter.
I love it. It makes you really accessible. And one of the things I love about what your posts is I've been carefully note-taking about the wines. Tell me about your wine fascination, because I love wine too. So
fantastic.
Tell me about it.
I got involved with wines when I was about 15. My stepmother was super into wine, and so I got to experience a lot. And then I think I made my first trip out to Napa when I was about 18, and then I got hooked on French wines. And I started with German wines, then French, then California, and then kind of expanded to the rest of the world. And so I've just been a passionate fan of learning about them and the stories behind all the different winemakers and wineries and the lore of wine. It's just a very social thing to enjoy.
Do you have currently, do you have a wine that a grape or a region or something that you just, if it pops up, it's like, you're going to love it?
No, not really, because they're so specific to to both the terroir and the winemaker, even the vintage. So I have a lot that I really like a lot. I'm definitely a big fan of the Bordeaux out of Saint-Emilion and Pomerol. I'm very big fan of white French Burgundy. I'm a very big fan of Napa Cabernets and Bordeaux blends. I'm a very big fan of the Rieslings and Alsatian wines from Germany and France. So there's lots. I'm an equal opportunity lover of different things.
I like Shiraz, but none of which you mentioned.
Well, Shiraz is great.
Yeah, like especially when it's full bodied and it's like a cold winter day and you have a big glass and it feels like it's, thick or something, like full bodied with the oak flavor or something.
Yeah, it's funny. I had bought in Australia maybe, probably 35 years ago when I was in Australia at Penfolds Grange. I bought at Penfolds Winery. I bought a case of Grange, which I am just now going through the 1981 Grange that was bottled in 1983. It's been kind of fun because it's sat there so long in my cellar, back and forgotten. And then one of our, we've had a bunch of power outs here in California, and one of my cellars died during the on again, off again thing. So one of my storage things died. And so we pulled the wine out, and I was like, oh, this is fun, because it was a lot of older things I had bought a long time ago and hadn't looked at in decades. So I've been enjoying the Penfolds Grange Shiraz from 1981 lately with anybody that happens to like Syrahs.
I'm dripping with envy. That sounds amazing. I love Penfolds. It's a great brand. And Wolf Blast, I think, is another one that I like, but it's probably not the same caliber wines that you're experimenting and testing right now. You have a more advanced palate, it seems.
It's great. And what I like about Penfolds too is, you're there looking over the city of Adelaide from the winery. They've got a restaurant there that's pretty fantastic. So you just go down and do some barrel tastings and walk around the winery and check out all the history and the stories, and then have dinner there looking over the city as you drink a bottle of Grange. It's a fun memory.
Well, it sounds like you haven't been just all business. I mean, if you look at your background, you've got just this incredible background, and it sounds like you've been enjoying life a little bit along the way. Do you think you could give us the Cole's notes of sort of like what's been sort of the history of your background, and just to kind of, so we can jump into what I'm really excited to talk about, which is growth marketing, exponential growth, and that kind of stuff. But just to give some people a little bit of your journey and what you've transitioned from.
Sure. On the business side?
Yeah.
Yeah. I started selling real estate. I got my real estate license when I was 18, was the soonest you were allowed to get it. And I was looking for ways to leverage that. I didn't want to go out and contact onesie-twosies, property owners for listings. So I hooked up with a center of influence that would allow me to sell lots of properties. And that was in the form of developers. So I started connecting with developers, and that allowed me to get lots of listings at one time. As I started chatting with those guys, about how they did what they did, they told me they used these things called syndications, where they would go out and get money from people and use that to do the deals and then split the profits. And ultimately, to do that, they needed a key man insurance. So when I was 19, I got my insurance license. When I was 20, I got my securities license, started selling those things. I did that as well as played in bands through school, and got a degree in accounting, got a degree in law, opened up my own law firm, practiced, actually represented Tony for several years back when Sam Georges was working with him when he was at the Town Center Drive location. And it was, just really fun practicing and doing all those things. I got into back in the 80s, I was doing leverage buyouts with my securities license from Prudential Securities from New York, and learned that you could buy and sell real estate for nothing down, then learned you could buy and sell companies for nothing down. And I've just been kind of investing and flipping and having fun with companies since then. I've got about 36 different companies right now that I'm working with. I've had 5 companies that have been on the Inc. 5,000 fastest growing companies list, 3 on the 500, and done quite a few exits. We exited 3 companies in the last 12 months. I've helped people purchase or sell for other companies during that period of time. So quite a bit of work in the growth, leverage, scale, and exit area.
And that's exactly a great jump off point. I mean, it's clear to me that you've seen repeatable patterns, and you've also been running some of your own experiments and thinking that are fairly breakthrough that you shared with us, at least in Business Mastery. Mm-hmm. And I was curious if you could really like one of my favorite posts you did was, I think it's based on an episode podcast that you have, because you have a podcast as well. And it's called Innovation is What Leads to Exponential Growth. And when you hear that, people think, well, of course, innovation. But the way you view innovation is totally different, in my opinion. I'm wondering if you could kind of jump in a little bit about where you've been finding innovation and, say, operational efficiencies that turn, an expense into an opportunity and things of that nature. And that's where most people think of growth marketing as just the outbound marketing, but you see the world totally differently. And if you could share this a little bit about how you view the world in creating growth.
Sure. Well, the one thing, like just kind of going up to the 36,000 foot level, is that if you are looking to innovate, it frequently comes from applying things that you learn in one industry or one area of your life to other areas of your life. And so starting with being a musician and writing songs and composing music helps you in the creative side to start with. So that's kind of my background is I like things that are creative to start with. So then you take that to business, and some of the biggest breakthroughs that I've had, like I mentioned, is the intersection of two different fields of study, things like that. And it's really interesting that we're talking about this right now, because I just more and more as I go through life see that that's where the big breakthroughs come from in terms of innovation and creativity. I think that for business, I created a business model innovation map where I take the 14 different business models that generally seem to be the things that pervade across everything and combine those with 14 different pricing models, and then say, how can we lay each of these things over each other in as many ways as possible to come up with as many creative opportunities to do business as we might be able to think of, and then how can you layer them and stack them within each other? So mixing and matching different models to different pricing models, different business models to different pricing models, and then stacking those combined business and pricing models on top of each other and combining those in different ways. And I at the event that I spoke at that we're talking about, I think I went through that matrix. But the one that you mentioned, which was expenses into profits, it's just one of the ways that you can think is inversion thinking. And so inversion thinking, which was invented by a German mathematician long, long ago, was just taking a look at something and saying, what if I look at this in the exact opposite of what I want? So if you look at an expense, you could say, well, what is the exact opposite of an expense? That would be a profit center. So if it's not a cost center, it's a profit center. How could I make these expense centers profit centers? And one of the coolest examples of this that I saw, and I remember reading the magazine article and thinking it was brilliant, and I got a kick out of how negative the take in the magazine article was. It was the November 2006 issue of Business Week, and it was a picture of Jeff Bezos on the cover, and it said something along the lines of, Jeff Bezos wants to run your company, Wall Street wishes he would just mind the store. And it's kind of comical now to look back and say, this is how poor the judgment of Wall Street is, because if you look at the latest profit numbers from the business segments of Amazon, AWS, Amazon Web Services, which is what they were ridiculing him for starting, actually makes more profit than all of the rest of Amazon combined. And I just love that. And so what he did was he said, we've got these huge expenses in all of our server farms and the technology and upkeep to keep all those things going. What if we could make that a profit center by making those available to the rest of the people who are on the web? And so he created this thing, Amazon Web Services, to do just that. Much of the web, including Netflix and many other companies, are run off of AWS. And it turns out that it's the most profitable thing that they do. So he took this expense, this huge expense, and turned it into a profit center. And if you look at I think it was about 22 billion in revenue that generated the 7 odd billion in profit. So if you take the 7 off of the 22, what is that? 15 billion in additional costs that would have been going against Amazon's profit if this hadn't been done, which if you then apply that 15 billion in cost against Amazon's current profits outside of AWS, it would take Amazon to a loss of about 7 billion, right? So that makes that company work. That's pretty crazy. And so looking at something like that and then saying, well, how can we apply this to our businesses? And then going through each major cost center. So we just list all of our top 7 cost centers and say, okay, what about the business costs us the most money? It's rent, it's payroll, it's inventory, those kinds of things. And then we look at each of those things and say, how could we turn that rent into a profit center? Would it be possible? Do we have any unused space that we could make available to other people? So we effectively Airbnb that unused space to other people, or do we have in for example, our office building at Digital Marketer, one of the companies that I own with some partners, we have a training center, but the training center isn't used 24/7. So what if we make that available to other people and we charge a fee for that? We could turn that actually into a profit center. Or what if we look at our content team in the Philippines that costs us $50,000 a month and we have capacity there? And so what if we make that service of producing that content available to other people outside of our company, which we did, and turned that into a profit center? So it's just inverting the things that you have in your business and saying, are there other ways to look at those things?
Is there a methodology or approach to cross the chasm? Because you can imagine there's some entrepreneur listening to this and going, okay, I'm gonna run after that. And at what point what's your sort of like framework for going, proceed with doing this without it being at the expense of the golden egg, like being distracting or doing too many things? Is there a methodology of thinking around that? And sometimes I think with maybe even Jeff Bezos, like did he automatically figure out that was eventually going to be a profit center, but at some point he had to kind of take a risk? When do you kind of like, how do you mitigate that risk to kind of go after those things?
Well, I think you can't be a good entrepreneur if you're not taking risk. So I definitely think there's risk involved. I think that as far as mitigating, you look at demand, just as you would say, I'm thinking about moving my product into a different geographic market. Is there demand? You would do some research ahead of making the decision, and then you would do testing. And so I think the same thing is true with this, that you would look at this. Ideally, the framework is the same framework you would apply to any other business you were thinking about expanding your existing business into. So the first thing would be, what are the additional resources that I'll need to do this? So then you list those additional resources and say, well, actually, I've got capacity. So the only additional resource I really need is some marketing materials and maybe an account manager. And then you figure out what is the cost of that. And then you query your market that you've already got and say, hey, we're thinking about adding this service. Is it something that you would be interested in? And you could actually contract for sales in advance of hiring up to satisfy the demand, because you've already got, that's the cool thing about this. You've already got the expense. You've already got the thing that is going to fulfill. So the marginal additional cost of a little bit of infrastructure and to support customers instead of your internal customers that are consuming the content or the service or the product, and the little bit of marketing that would have to go into it are usually pretty minimal. So that I don't think there's a lot of risk to start with as you look at this thing. Does that make sense?
It does. And, I think you did some math, if I recall, about for every dollar you save in your bottom line, it's like how much income you have to produce to make those grounds. Everybody's so focused on the top line sales for growth. Do you have some sort of way of helping, business owners? I'm sure everyone's different, but looking at how valuable it is to look at your cost centers, because everybody, when they come to me anyways for marketing, it's always about top line sales, but they don't realize that there's going to be huge growth impacts to your expenses.
Yeah, and I think the thing that we model everything with financial models. So we do what they call sensitivity analysis, where we'll look at our existing financial statements and then make assumptions and plug the numbers of the assumptions in and then see how that impacts. But the really cool thing about the E to P, the expense to profit thing, is that what you already have your number for the expense. And so we just take that number straight out of the financial statement, and then we say, well, if we were able to assume, where's our break even? We need to sell this many units to actually turn this expense, to cancel that expense and turn it into a profit. And then we reverse engineer, how can we get that many customers? So like for the content business, we said, okay, it's $49,000 a month. If we could get 7 customers at $7,000 a month, that's $49,000 a month, and we would be able to break even, assume we didn't add any costs. But we ultimately determined if we could just add 8 customers, then we would be able to actually be operating at a profit, because it would cost us about $4,000 to have the additional person that we needed to be an account rep. And we already had creative, because it's a content, it was a content center. So they were able to create the things that we needed to create on the marketing front. So it's really just, to me, the model is you pull out the cost and then you reverse engineer will it sell? Now, the formula to me is you say, what are my top 7 cost centers? And then you say, will it sell? Then you say, who would buy it? Then you go out and talk to the people that would buy it. Then you say, can I make it recurring revenue? Because that's really great if it could be paying for itself every single month. You didn't have to go out and sell somebody again. And then say, how many of these things in terms of units do I have to sell? Do I think I can sell that? And then you query your warm market of people that might be interested. And that's a pretty good measure, because if you can go there and you get lots of people going, absolutely, I would love to have that. Or if you even have people already asking you. And I know that I did this with a company that I'm an advisor to called Scribe, that was started by an author named Tucker Max.
That's who I'm actually using for my book.
Oh, okay, great. Me too. Yeah. So Tucker's great. And we were sitting down talking about this, and he was like, holy crap. He said, there's like 14 additional entry points now for me to get customers that I can provide services to, because originally all they did was they wrote your book for you, and then they edited it and did a cover design and marketed it and launched it and put you on stages and stuff like that. And I said, each of those different things that you're doing for people now should or could be a profit center for you. And maybe not everybody wants to write a book with you because they've already got the book written. Maybe they just need editing, or they just need a launch service, or they just need the marketing on a continuing basis, or they just want to speak, etc. And so, or they just want a book cover. And so now we've got all of these extra places that are entry points into the funnel for everything else, as well as being a profit center.
Yeah, I saw that. He's got he just released all that stuff. He has guided seminars for authors, and then you can have coaching 1-to-1 with your book and book launch. It's brilliant.
Yeah, that all came out of us having a conversation about it. It's pretty funny.
Oh my goodness, that's amazing. It's funny because actually the CEO of Scribe is going to be on my podcast, and we're going to, because their process was so amazing. I asked them if he'd be on the podcast so we could talk about how this is a new way of creating content and just a really innovative way in my mind.
JT and Tucker are brilliant people.
Amazing. Small world. So keeping on this topic, you had this really great post called Split the Truck.
Yep.
And it's, I'd love for you to talk about it, because it's kind of the same vein about innovation of cost, but this is more about like looking at your services and how you can kind of piggyback and expand in really innovative ways. Do you mind sharing with us that a little bit? Because I think that one really would resonate with people.
Yeah, not at all. So that came from a really great book called Profit First by Mike Michalowicz. And what was really funny is it came out of a gentleman that he was arguing with, who was saying, you can't do this profit thing. You can't take your profits first. There's no room for it. And as they were having the discussion, one of the other people that was sitting there yelled, split the truck, split the truck, split the truck. And they were like, what the heck are you talking about? And he said, I've been trying to figure out all these years how to deliver. I've got 2 sets of trucks and 2 sets of drivers, and one set's tanker trucks and one set's box trucks. And I'm delivering these oil cans that I sell to I'm delivering bulk oil to big customers like Walmart, and I'm delivering, or Jiffy Lube, and I'm delivering the shelf stock stuff to retailers like Walmart. So he just decided, what if I make half the truck a tanker truck and half the truck a box truck? And so it got me to thinking about really what would the process be? Because I'm a process guy. So I like to figure out, how do you turn that into steps that would allow you to maybe create the innovation to come up with splitting the truck? And the first thing to do, I think, is just to ask better questions. So if you're always asking, how can I lower my costs? How can I get my 6 months goals or 1 year goals in 3 months or 6 months? How can I do things better, faster? How can I serve my customers better, and then you'll continue to innovate. And there's physicists use a thing called first principles reasoning to do this, where they break everything down to the assumptions. They first look at the assumptions that underlie whatever's going on. So you might say, and a great example is a friend of mine that was making, they were making these mugs out of baseball bats. So they would cut the bats up that schools were throwing away old bats. They went and got these bats, drilled them out, and turned it into mugs. And they are now in all the baseball stadiums all over the country. And so the assumption there, the cost though, for a mug, I think it was about $20, and they sell them for $50. And so the assumptions underlying that are, we have to use baseball bats. We have to drill them out. We have to use these materials. But a person like Elon Musk would go into this like he did with batteries and say, well, let's break that down. What's the commoditized cost of the raw materials that we're talking about here? And maybe if you look at those on a commodities exchange, or you say, what could I buy those things for overseas? Maybe you can buy those materials, and instead of using old baseball bats, you can create things that look like baseball bats out of wood that you didn't have to go through all the process of reclaiming, and you'd be able to have the same product available for, say, 90% less. So it's just looking at all the assumptions. Musk did that with batteries. So batteries per kilowatt hour were about $600 per kilowatt hour when he started looking at doing the Tesla. And he said, but the costs to make those batteries are significantly less than that. It doesn't make any sense. There's so much profit and expense that's built in there. What if I go in and re-engineer how you make a battery in the first place? Or for the space launch, right? For SpaceX, why do I have to assume that I need to use a new rocket every single time? What if I could use the same rocket over and over? And just you go in and look at all those principles and break them down to their assumptions, and then you ask those questions and come up with new solutions. And very frequently that will help you come up with something new. And so the expense to profits thing, to me, the question there is, what are the expenses that I could turn into profits? And that's basically what the gentleman with the split the truck thing was doing. So I think that just trying to think differently is a huge deal, and being as creative as you can, and read as many books about creativity and lateral thinking as you can, and do crosswords, and try to get past associative bias, where we say that liquid goes in a tanker truck only. That's the only way you can have a liquid and carry it. That's an associative bias. You say a tanker truck is required to carry that liquid. What if I didn't associate tanker trucks with the transport of liquid? What other ways could I do that? Right? Then you start thinking creatively.
So at Business Mastery, I think you just answered one of my questions I was going to ask in this podcast, because I couldn't read my own writing. And I think I had in my notes FPD, but I think it's FPR, because I wrote my notes. The idea is to break down complicated problems into basic elements and then reassemble them to the ground up. That's this exact same thing, correct?
It is FPR. You're right.
Yeah. Okay. So it's not FPD, FPD, or whatever I called it. So, okay. That's amazing. You totally answered. That was amazing breakdown of what that is. And, when you're talking about that first principle reasoning, you can apply that to any type of marketing or business activity and unlock really incredible potential. What is an example of something you've applied some of your methodologies to, and just seen massive growth that somebody would just not even imagine possible?
Well, the best example would be just looking at all of our different expenses. So we looked at that content team. That is the application of first principles reasoning, is to say, does an expense need to be an expense? I shouldn't assume that these things necessarily need to be an expense and can't be a profit center. And so then you go through each of those things and say, how can I turn them into the other thing? We do a combination of first principles reasoning and inversion thinking. Inversion thinking is, what do I not want to happen, and how do I get there, so that I can then look at the opposite side of that and say, okay, these are the things that get me there, so I'm going to do the opposite of the things that get me to the place I don't want to be. And that's another way of approaching that as well. So we do it all the time. So we've done it with our physical space. We've done it with our products that we sell, saying, should we assume that we can only sell these things at retail? No, we sell bath bombs, for example. Let's not just sell the bath bombs at retail. Let's also sell them wholesale because they're bigger orders, even though they're lower margin. But that then allows us to buy more supplies and to buy those supplies, those raw material supplies, cheaper because we're buying more of them. And if we do the math, that we actually make more money off of that, and we can then produce our bath bombs less expensively than anybody else. And then we say, okay, well, should we assume that we can only sell wholesale? No, we shouldn't. We can also sell the raw materials in bulk themselves to people that want to make their own bath bombs, not just people that want to buy at retail and people that want to buy wholesale. So that allows us to buy even more raw materials. And then that gives us new places to sell and drives our cost even lower, which ultimately makes it impossible to compete with us on price because our cost is so low because of the volume that we're doing. That would be a good example as well.
Amazing. It's like, but I almost feel like what you're doing is also changing people's mindset. Like, not just, hey, this is something you should do. It's like, this is how you should think ongoing. Like run at your problems or face the things you might want to ignore or not think about and rethink them, and working that muscle to make that now your new superpower, if you want to call it.
Yeah, I think that the ability to look for different ways to do things, find different solutions, find the intersection of different disciplines is tremendous. And so, taking things that you learn in different businesses and applying them to other businesses. We had a machine manufacturing company that we found a process that was being used in this filtering of agricultural products to apply to oil spill cleanups, for example. It's just thinking, where else can I use this, and how would I apply this to this challenge? And so you look throughout any, if you're just talking about your business, it's like within your business, what are the challenges that I'm having? Well, how would I approach this if I couldn't do this? That's another way that you can do it is impose constraints and say, what if I couldn't? What if I didn't have this capital? Or what if I didn't have this resource? Or what if I didn't have this supply? How could I do this differently? And just seeing all the different ways that you can do it. And that frequently results in pretty significant innovations. I was talking about lots of different examples, like the different things that we have, that we've seen in our business, the different things that you see out in the world that create amazing new innovations that frequently it's just looking within your business and saying, what if I impose constraints that don't exist currently? What if I couldn't do this way? What if I didn't have this raw material and I had to substitute another raw material? What if I couldn't process at this factory? What if I had to get it within this cost? What if I had to achieve my goals within this period of time? All of those constraints that you then could artificially place on yourself and say, how would I deal with this if this was the case? So that you're creating simulations that force you to use different things. And I think that's a great way to get innovative within your own company.
So that's all awesome on the innovation side. And a lot of people listening are going to go, well, hey, what about innovation in terms of top line growth, like outbound and marketing? I mean, that's, as you know, that's most entrepreneurs in business are just like, I want to get more sales and I want to grow. How would you say is something that you've seen that is really important as a fundamental or a way of thinking to approaching top line growth?
Well, I think that there are lots of things that you can do when you're thinking about how do I grow my company faster on the top line. The one of the easiest things to do is to think about expanding internationally. So one of the things that we did was we recently sold controlling interest in one of our companies to a significantly larger company, because we had tried going international with it, but we just didn't have the skill sets to do that. And we actually tried and failed pretty hard because the people that were in the country that we were expanding into, which is its own continent, so it's Australia, stole our money. and working with a partner.
Well, that's a problem.
But yeah, but the things that I would say for quick wins of expanding top line would be, how can you expand internationally? How can you go into territories that you're not in right now? Preferably territories that are trending upward in terms of GDP or any growth measurement that you can look at. You could take your manufacturing in-house. That's going to increase your top line because you're going to acquire somebody else, and then you're going to have manufacturing. You could buy your competitors, because if you've got 5,000 customers and you want to have 10,000, there's no faster way to get them tend to find somebody else that's got that 5,000 and you just buy them. You could buy your suppliers or your clients or your partners. You could buy complementary media. That's another thing that we look at. Acquisition, to me, there's 7 different categories of acquisition that I talk about, and that's your competitors. You can buy media. You can buy resources or teams. You can buy services or products that your customers or you are consuming right now. You can buy your supply chain up or down. You can buy channels of distribution, or you can buy intellectual property. And so all of those are really good ways to increase your top line. You could franchise to other people. You could license your products or your brands. You could create joint ventures or strategic partnerships. I'm really huge on strategic partnerships. You could license other people's brands or services, so you have new products and services to offer to your existing people without having to actually create them. You could borrow sales forces or rep networks. We've done that in lots of different industries where we have a product that we want to get into a specific set of stores or a specific network, and there's an existing sales force or rep network that sells within that particular niche. And so we just go and say, hey, you're not selling anything. This isn't competing. This will only give you an additional revenue source, and then get those people to sell for you. You could add services to digital products that you've got. You could add physical products to digital services you've got. You could do bolt-on businesses where you take your business that you're already doing and you go find somebody else who has a complementary, non-competing business that has a huge swath of the customers that you want. And then you say, let me provide this additional thing that I do to those customers, and bolt that onto your business. And then you instantly have access to a ton of other customers. So there's a lot of different ways you can do it.
You could hear through the internet that somebody couldn't scribble fast enough to get like those 20 plus ideas. It was awesome. I remember at Business Mastery, you were ripping through a whole bunch of stuff, like ideas, and you could just, I'm sure, I mean, maybe for you, because you're speaking, you probably could see, but I'm pretty sure you could see that everybody's head was down, scribbling rapidly. That was one of the most intense sessions of real ideation around really opening up conversation. Because I remember at the break, everybody was just bubbling.
That's great.
You did such an incredible job of not just talking about the theory, but giving examples. And then just like you just shared right now, of just like real quick thinking. And I think that's really important, because I think some people are too theory, and you've just got all this great experience. And one of the things I love is going back to that one post I just love, the innovation is what leads to exponential growth. You had 4 questions that you ask to really help you scale these ideas. And it has as much to do with the mindset and the way that you think. Do you think we could go through those and kind of share that a little bit?
Let's see. So exponential growth, see if I can remember that, because one of the downsides of writing so much is that you tend to forget the things that you wrote.
No, I have it right here, actually. So I was just looking at it. So it's like, what preconceptions do you have about both your life and the business that that's holding you back?
Right.
What's the internal language patterns that you're telling yourself that's holding you back? And what are the assumptions that you're making that might not actually be facts? And how can you apply lateral thinking to your situation? Those questions, I think, are unbelievably powerful for somebody. And how did you come up with that? And is that something that you teach in what you share with businesses, or is it something you just ask yourself as you're kind of handling this?
Yeah, it is.
Give us more.
I do several 2-day workshops. So I've got one called Leverage, Exit, Grow, Scale. And I start the whole thing with talking about processes and how you think. And so that's the very first place that I start is think different. That's a really important thing. And so it comes from doing this stuff. That's the really great thing, is there isn't any theory here. Everything that I do, it comes from everything that I do every single day, everything that I've learned in the crucible of actually operating businesses and buying and selling and going through challenges and things like that, and not being willing to accept that, that what is the status right now is acceptable, is the best that we can do. So that's my, that's kind of my thing is when you live it, it really makes a huge difference.
Let me tell you why this jumps out to me is because I've been in the Tony Robbins bubble doing the training in his mastermind as a plat partner. And he touches on the stories that we tell ourselves, the misconceptions we have of ourselves and our limitations and the assumptions we're making, and really working on that self-work. And this is that to business. And I think a lot of people, it's like you really, like, it's easy enough to say, like, what preconceptions do you have about your life and your business that are holding you back? But actually doing that and actually addressing stuff, because you just kind of go on autopilot. You're kind of like, unconsciously just assume that, FedEx delivers, who's to think if you're FedEx that maybe you do something different, so how do you break through the things that where you actually identify those, maybe, your preconceived notions of what you do?
Well, it's just going through those processes. Like, so to me is the breaking everything down to the assumptions, to their basic principles. That's a huge thing. So that's my process for doing that. With business, I look at what can I do to 10x the business as fast as possible. And then, the easy things are, how can I add additional value to the things that I'm doing right now? And then, that will allow me to charge more for the products or services that I've got right now. And then what are the other markets that I can sell my existing products to, and how can I extend the products I've got right now? What new products will these markets buy? What are the extended markets for existing products? What are new applications for those products? That's a grid that I go through an exercise on. And then, I do what I just talked about. Where is the business? Who already has my customers that I can go, and then that I can go and access? And if what I've got right now won't serve them, then what can I do to innovate or change or modify or somehow create something new that would appeal to those customers using the resources that I've already got? And those really, really help. And then I add acquisitions onto that as far as answering those same questions. Using those seven different types of acquisitions I mentioned earlier. And that gives me a pretty good handle on how to grow anything super, super fast.
See, I love that exercise. You did that with us. And that just in a playful way, just allowed to have no judgment, just think crazy. What would you do? I remember you just gave us permission to kind of like, you're just giving us ideas and just 10x everything. And once you started doing it, you started going, oh my goodness, there's like all these things. Cause I'm not putting a judgment like, oh, should I or could I or how to do it. I was just going, what if, just I could do this? And, and it's amazing what comes through that process of actually mapping back. And I think to that exercise today, I've applied some of that.
That's awesome.
It's a great exercise.
Yeah. Thank you. That the best thing that you could ever tell me is that you did some of that stuff. That's so great.
Oh, I'm not alone. I mean, I know that every plat partner will be listening to this podcast. Like, we absolutely have taken so much value as a group, and anybody listening that can get you speaking, jump at it. Or if you get a chance to listen to Roland, like, that was probably some of the best content I've ever, heard. And I couldn't write down stuff fast enough. It's amazing.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you.
So one of the things I'm going to shift a little bit into is, again, it's a little bit of mindset is you call it conscious incompetence. Mm-hmm. And I find that really interesting is, as business owners, that another way to scale, you call it, I think you just called it conscious incompetence, which is you're kind of doing stuff that you shouldn't be doing. Do you want to talk a little bit about that and some examples where you've seen massive uptakes on?
Yeah, well, I think the first time I ever heard the 4 levels of competence was probably from Tony. And it's that we start out being unconsciously incompetent, and our goal is to be consciously competent. And the steps in between, You go from unconsciously incompetent, where you don't even know that you're doing things wrong, to to unconscious. Unconscious incompetence to conscious incompetence, where you know that you're doing things wrong and you know therefore that you can correct them, and then you go to conscious competence, where you are aware that you're doing things right and you're doing it with some effort, to unconscious competence, where you are doing everything right and you're not even thinking about it. So it's just progressing through those levels of competence in anything that you do, applying it to the business environment. Does that make sense?
It does. Like, how many owners they know they shouldn't be doing this, but they just do it anyways, but they don't realize how much that is holding them back from potential growth.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And I think that's why, so a lot of the tools that I shared there, which are visual, so it's hard to talk about them without seeing them, but that's what they're designed to do, is to help you identify the different stages where you've got that going on. And where you are, first, it's to make you aware, so that you go from unconscious incompetence to conscious incompetence. So you're like, okay, gosh, there are opportunities to do all these things that I never realized there were. And these are the assumptions that I made unconsciously because I never took the time to look at them. So it's really getting you out of that just state of acceptance that many people start at, where, okay, this is the way things are. This is the way you have to make a car. This is the way you have to sell this consulting service. This is the way you have to invest in stocks, and saying, well, why? Let me look at every single aspect of how, of my beliefs around this thing, and say, does this have to be this way? And should this be this way? And is there a better way? So then you'll go from unconscious incompetence to conscious incompetence. And now you're aware that there's possibility and there's discord and misalignment and opportunity and all these things that you can then start taking action on, which gets you from that stage of recognition into the actual doing something about those things. Now you get to, okay, how can I solve these challenges and correct these misalignments and move forward to do these things better? What are the better solutions? Then you get to that conscious competence that, okay, I've fixed those things. Now, how do I ingrain those into myself and my staff and my culture of my company to make them part of the unconsciously competent culture that we've got, so that we're moving forward now at a higher level? That
is a mouthful when you explain that. It's but like that whole process is, I love the journey that you could take somebody on to doing that. But what's the gap from them actually acting on, like emotional intelligence or discipline, or both?
Yeah. Yes, for sure. Absolutely.
So I think today more than ever, entrepreneurs are really looking for that edge for growth. And would you say, if you were to kind of like break it down, like how much of it is mental, internal thinking, top line growth, internal, cost savings for growth? Like if you're kind of like to split it up and just say, as a pattern that I've seen across all industries, because you have such a breadth of knowledge, what would you see is probably like in the top, like in order of like what's holding people back from growth?
Well, I think it's always mindset. I really do. I think that if you look at what other people have accomplished, they may have more luck or more opportunity, but generally, I am a firm believer in possibility, and so I think that over and over and over again, the people who do not go as far as they can go, or who are not as happy as they want to be, or not as accomplished as they want to be, it's their own internal things that hold them back, including me. I mean, there are people that are way farther along in every area of life than I am. And so I try to live in conscious incompetence and look at those people and say, what can I learn from them that will help advance me along the way? But I think it's all mindset. Because if you can get to accept the fact that the possibility exists for you to accomplish whatever thing you want to accomplish, and someone else has already done it, then we know there's a model for doing it. And all you have to do, and Tony teaches this, right? All you have to do at that point is emulate the actions and beliefs of the people who have gotten the thing or accomplished the thing, whether it be top line growth or profitability or exiting a company or net worth or whatever that you want to accomplish. And if you think those thoughts and do those things, then you should be able to accomplish the same thing. Yet, why do more people not do that? It's because there's some payoff for not taking action to stay where they are now. There's some thing that they get out of saying, well, that's not me, that's these other people, or I don't have these opportunities, or the fear of failure keeps them from taking the actions that they know they need to take. Like, all that is mindset, every single bit of it. Because the easy part, even if the actions are hard, I think the far harder part is the mentality of saying, I can do this, I'm going to do this. And then you can look at David Goggins and the SEALs that say that most of us under-index and perform at only 40% of our physical possibility. And I think that you apply that too and say, well, that's because of mindset. So what if we were all instantly performing at 2.5 times the physical performance that we can perform at right now, or that we think we can perform at? That would be operating at 100% physical capacity, right? Or physical potentiality. And I think that mindset is the same way, that we're all under indexing by orders of magnitude of what we're capable of, because look at the people who aren't inhibited by that in any given category. And unfortunately, I haven't yet seen anybody who's accomplished everything that I've seen other people accomplish in every single category. But maybe that's good, because that would be very scary. But at the same time, I think it's possible for us. So it's just thinking. I know that I can do more. I know that I can push myself farther. Now, you might be making conscious decisions about trade-offs. You might say, well, I don't want to be Steve Jobs or Elon Musk and have kind of not really great family relationships or personal relationships, because the only thing I obsess over constantly is this business thing. And that's okay. Then that's a conscious decision, which can make you happier about not having achieved the thing you want to achieve, because you've made a trade-off decision and you've said, I want family, and I want, a spouse, and I want, these other personal fulfillments, or I want these philanthropic give back things that those people aren't focused on. But then all of that just makes you happier. To me, if you realize that you're not a victim of the circumstance, that you're actually in the place that you're at because of the conscious choices and trade-offs that you're making, and that the possibility exists and the model exists to get to anything that you think you want, then you can identify the specific steps and thoughts and actions that you have to take to get you to that place that you think you want to be, and look at them and say, do I want to pay the price? Do I want to take those steps and think those thoughts and believe that way and sacrifice those things to get to that? Or do I not? And then if you made that decision, you can be happier, which ultimately, to me, could lead all of us to be a whole lot happier.
It's like being okay with being consciously imbalanced in some areas of your life because it's serving you at the time.
Exactly.
Amazing. So if you're going to leave with 3 ideas for someone to tackle this mindset, and these are the 3 things you can think of to start you on this path. And I think you said one of them, because you keep saying it, because this is your growth mindset. You're like, it's possible. You're thinking anything's possible. I'm assuming that might be one of them. But what are the 3 things that someone listeners could go, okay, these are the 3 things you need to tackle to get that mindset galvanized into this direction to get you moving forward?
Yeah, I if I had to pick any 3, I would definitely, what we just talked about, I think is so important. I think that that realizing that you can accomplish anything that you want to accomplish if you go through the process of identify the model, and then reverse engineer the steps to get there. And then if you do the things they did and think the things they thought, you should be able to get to that place. And if you look at some of the people who overcame great challenges, both physically and mentally, to accomplish the things they've accomplished, I think that can really help you with the belief in the possibility. And the mechanics of doing it are copy the beliefs and the actions, right? So that'd be the first thing. The second thing would be learn to think differently in terms of everything that you believe to be true right now. If you break down the assumptions that you have behind that, there's the possibility to reformulate, restructure, assemble those things in a different set of assumptions that might allow you to achieve significantly more than you're achieving right now in terms of business growth, personal, whatever. And then the inversion thinking of really, if you can think about all the things you don't want to happen, then, and Charlie Munger does a great job of this. I like his saying that says, tell me where I'm going to go. Tell me where I'm going to die so that I never go there. I love that. Right. So it would be the same thing to, think about all the things that you don't want to have happen, not to focus on them in a bad way and obsess over them so that it actually attracts those things into your life, but to be aware of them and then think about, well, how do I not get to that place? What are the things that I would take? What are the things that get me there so I don't do those things? Those would be three big high level things. And then when I go into that 1000x matrix of all the different things that I showed briefly when I spoke, there's 43 different steps and tools and stuff like that you look at to get there. But the overarching thought process is really controlled by those three things we just talked about.
Amazing. Roland, thank you so much. I mean, you've been sharing so much of your knowledge on this podcast and just in general. And the fact that you now have some courses and different things where people can access some of your thinking. And maybe this is an assumption I have. I think you're at a point in your career with the success you've had. You don't need to be teaching and doing this. Is this sort of part of your legacy, or what drives you to do this, to share this? Because I think, after seeing you speak, I'm just absolutely feel that anyone that is serious about growth needs to make sure they go through one of your courses and listen to a lot of the information you have to share. What's driving you? Where are you going next?
Yeah, it's the thing that is most important to me is to help other people. And so I do that in large part just by sharing and talking and having conversations and speaking and doing what you and I are doing right now. And I don't need to sell courses. I don't sell a lot of courses. I do think that you will get more action from people who have some sort of skin in the game. So whatever deals I do what I do because not really for legacy as much as to help other people who I think can achieve great things and change the world by sharing with them some of the things that I've learned along the way. That's that. And maybe that equals legacy, but it's not out of I want to be remembered. I just want to help.
I love it. And you have thank you again so much for being on my show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I'm beyond honored. Thank you so much.
Likewise.
And I have so much respect. If you could just share with everybody where they could follow you or where you'd like them to go, that'd be awesome.
Yes. So I have a podcast also called Business Lunch where I share stuff like this all the time. I'm happy to have anybody listen to that. You just subscribe to it on iTunes or Spotify or any of the other places you listen to podcasts. And I have a website at Roland Fraiser, RolandFraiser.com. And I'm there as well as on all the different social platforms.
Awesome. Thank you again for being on this show. And to all of you listening out there, that's another episode of Groundswell. Please leave your show notes on iTunes. You can reach me directly at scott@groundswell.marketing. And until next time, mahalo.